Hello, hello world, hello internet. Happy Monday. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I don't know if it's morning at any part of the world, maybe some very east parts of the world. But yeah, thanks for joining us here. This is the Columbus App Dev User Group. I'm your host, Sam Basu, and I have my very good friend, Jason, on here with me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. So, folks, if you're watching this just on Twitch, we do a bunch of other things on this channel, but this is a slightly different stream. This is actually a user group. We used to meet in person, but again, we are all living through a pandemic, so we are at least getting to hang out online. So this is a little bit more formal. We will have some housekeeping things, and we meet in person in Columbus, Ohio. But we are at least here, all of us, live on the internet. So the audience here are mixed bags here. So some of our regular folks, plus anybody else who wants to tune in on Twitch. So welcome, everyone. So let me start up with just a couple of housekeeping things here, if I might. Yeah, there we go. And let me find my mouse. There you go. Welcome, everyone. So like I said, this is the Columbus App Dev User Group. You can find us online, website, Meetup, Twitter, you name it. And we meet third Mondays every month right here on the internet, or when we are in person, we meet in Columbus, Ohio at Improving Offices. So that's who we are. And I mean, we have been going on for quite some time now, 10 plus years now, actually. So thanks everyone for tuning in. These are some of our sponsors who make things happen. They give us swag, they give us the space, they give us pizza. This, Jason, is the worst part of doing virtual things because I try to convince the wife, like Mondays, some of these Mondays are pizza nights, and then it just doesn't always work out to be like today is not pizza night for us, which makes us sad. But anyways, these are all of our sponsors who help us put on events like this. So a big thank you. We also partner up with a few folks, these folks in particular, Visual Studio Live. It's a set of conferences that happens all throughout the country. Things are in different mode, obviously, with the pandemic. But if you do end up going to one of these conferences, you get a big discount just because you're part of the user group. And this one is coming up next. So there's like light at the end of the tunnel. In December, we are going to have a big show in Orlando. And I think the call for speakers is still open, right, Jason? I might have to check.
Yes, I think it's another week or two, if I remember.
Yeah. I think I've submitted a couple, but I will do more. So yeah, folks, go ahead and submit. You can just look up Visual Studio Live, and that should get you there. So we also run through a few things that are happening either locally in Ohio or just anywhere else in the world now. So we have a partner user group, that's the .NET user group, which, Jason, I know you spoke there, I think last month or maybe the month before. But looks like they are doing, they are doing accessibility cookbook. That should be fun, and they meet every fourth Thursday, I think, each month, and that's also just here on Twitch. So go and join them if you can spare some time and just sit through what looks like a really good accessibility session. Then we have a few conferences that are kind of ongoing. This actually started today. I spoke very early in the morning. This is actually in Europe, but again, it's all virtual. So this may be one of the benefits because like everyone can just tune in. So this is Techorama. It happens in beautiful Antwerp, Belgium, but they're all virtual. They do have some workshop days. So today and tomorrow are the main conference days, and then there's a workshop day. So if you want, tune in. They got some good content. And then
there's one tomorrow, just real quick, on a speaker. His name is Bart de Smet, and he's going to be doing a talk on Project Reactor. So I can't say more about it because it's not officially out in the open yet, but that one I think is going to be a really interesting talk. So
nice.
For what it's worth.
Very nice. Yeah. All right, and then I'm just trying to go like chronologically on what I could think of is coming up. Build is coming up next Monday, not Monday, maybe Tuesday, but 3 days of nonstop content almost, and a lot of great speakers from Microsoft. I know a lot of folks who have been actively working on their content, so a lot of things to look forward to with Blazor, with .NET MAUI, and C# and all the things. So again, tune in and register if you haven't already. It's all free. It's all virtual. So looking forward to a good week next week. What else? We have Dev Intersection coming up. That is actually in June, and it's a hybrid conference. So some of us are going to be there in person, and then the rest of the speakers and some of the audience is going to be hybrid. So it will be live streamed as well. So again, you can see like things are slowly starting to get back to some sort of normalcy. We also have Code Palooza, which is one of our beloved conferences, regional conferences. This happens in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is happening in August. This also is fully virtual, so again, you get to tune in from wherever you are. And I think there might be a few more other conferences that I'm forgetting, like Music City Code and a few other things that are coming up that are also virtual. And then Tech Bash, you get to see like now things are starting to be a mix of in-person and virtual. Tech Bash actually is a conference that happens at the Kalahari Resorts in Pennsylvania and in Ohio. They are doing in-person again in October, and their call for speakers is open. So if you want to submit and just come and join us and hang out at a water park with your family, this may be your opportunity. So check these things out. So next month, we have my partner in crime, actually, Mr. Ed Charbonneau. We call him Blazer King. He didn't say what exactly he wants to speak on, but he's going to be on next month. I'm guessing it's something Blazer because that's what he lives and breathes. So that should be fun. And then actually for July, we have Sean Wildermuth talking about something in ASP.NET core feature that he's excited about. So a good set of speakers coming up, which brings us to today. Drum rolls! All right, Jason is here. Jason is here to talk about all things cool and new in C# 9. And Jason, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. I will get my presentation started.
So yeah, give me a second to get mine down. And you are up.
All right, cool. So thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Jason Bock. I am a developer advocate with, I know you had Quicken Loans on there. It got announced that the name is going to switch to Rocket Mortgage in July. So that's the name change there. That's where I work. And my talk tonight is going to be on all things C#, especially focusing on all the things that are new in C# 9. So that's a little bit of personal information about myself. If you want to check me out on Twitter, you can go there. I have my repositories up on GitHub, a bunch of code examples there. The demos that I'm going to be going through tonight, they're all up in a repository, and I will show you that on the next slide. If you have questions during the talk, Sam or I'll notice the comment over there, and I'll take that and go through those as best as I can, trying to keep it within the time limit, so to speak. If something comes up that I didn't get to and you want to talk to me about it later, or something comes up a day or two later, just send me an email and I can respond to you that way as well. So the presentation is actually in the last repo that you see down there, and you may want to take a look at the notes section in this slide deck because I have links to a whole bunch of things, especially the last slide. There's a whole bunch of references to things that you can take a look at later, so you can do that. The code is going to be in that first repository URL that you see there, and then that second one is actually something that I'm going to be showing real quick on source generators. That deserves a whole repository in and of itself, and you'll probably see why once I get there. So that's where all the code and slides and everything are. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about language evolution and how we got from where C# started to where we are now. The bulk of the talk is going to be on C# 9 features and how they work. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the end talking about the future directions of C# and where it might possibly be heading. All right. So language evolution of C#. I feel like I'm starting to be kind of an old person because I remember when C# was released way back in 1905 or whatever it is. Well, actually 2002. So it's approximately 19 years old at this time. And I was out of college and been developing for a while. And then I started hearing about things like next generation web services and cool and COM++ and all these things way back in the day. And then eventually the marketing landed on .NET and C# and it was all this really interesting stuff. And people kind of forget that, now in 2021, that C# arguably was kind of a reaction from Microsoft to Java, which was a hugely popular language way back in the late 90s. And that's why, in some respects, Microsoft went off and developed .NET and C#. What's interesting is all the evolution that's happened since then, and the things that you can do now in the language and all the features that have been added. So I'm just going to go through these real quick. Not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just to give you a feel for what that evolution has been like in the language. So if you see the first version, these are a lot of things that you would expect in a typical object-oriented language, like classes and interfaces, and events were an interesting addition. But nothing here is that revolutionary in terms of what you would think about in an object-oriented programming language. Of course, that changes over time. Version 2, I think one of the biggest features that was ever added to C# is generics. It's quite hard to think of programming in C# without having generics at your fingertips, and to think that for 3 years we actually had to do things in C# without generics. So if somebody said, what's my top 3 features in C#, I'd say generics is probably one of them. Version 3 added link, but with link came a whole bunch of other features that enabled and empowered link. For example, like var and implicitly typed local variables and query expressions and anonymous types and all these other things that you can use without having to do something in link directly. So version 3 was a pretty big release and added a lot of cool features to it. Version 4 starts getting down a little bit. There wasn't actually a lot added in version 4. That named and optional arguments is kind of cool, but again, and generic co-and-contra-variants is interesting, but it's also one of those topics that takes a little bit to understand what exactly is going on. But the long and short of it is not a whole lot added. Version 5.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask questions? I'm going to be your sidekick who's just going to who keeps asking dumb questions all through.
Are these dumb answers? So we're good. So
are these versions corresponding to the C# numbers, like C# 1 to 9?
Yep.
Okay.
So if you look in the notes section on all these slides, especially these, I have links to where this is called out in the markdown documents from the C# repository. So yeah, these all are related to each version number in C#.
Yeah. And what's been the cadence like now? Nowadays we expect every year and a half maybe of a C# update, version 1 to 5. What was that like?
So yeah, it was slower. Version 1 to 2 was about 3 years. I think 2 to 3 was 2. 3 to 4 is maybe 3 years. So it was a slower cadence. And as you're going to see when I get into the newer ones, it speeds up to where we're at right now, which is approximately a new version every year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So version 5 doesn't look like a lot was added, but you have asynchronous methods, which was a rather large feature in and of itself, adding async, await, these async state machines that are built for you and be able to do asynchronous programming. So that was a pretty large feature. But what was going on also from really the first version all the way up until version 6 is this project that was called Project Rosslyn, or what was named eventually. The official name is the .NET compiler platform, but everybody knows it as Rosslyn. It was essentially writing the compiler in C#. It was originally written in C++. And over time, they wanted to write it in the language itself, but not just that, actually make the compilation an API so that you could inspect a syntax tree or a semantic model. You can make changes to it, even though those were actually mutable. You get a new one back. All these services that are built on top of the compiler API, like analyzers, refactorings. We're going to talk about source generators later. All these things are enabled and powered by Project Rosslyn, that API that drives everything you do in terms of a compilation in C#. And the cool thing about it is that in 2014, it was announced that it was going to be open source. In fact, Anders Heilsberg did that right live on the build stage and pressed the button and published it to Coplex at the time. It's now on GitHub. But that was quite a shock. And it was a great thing because I think you saw also that ship turning in terms of how open source was viewed at Microsoft, where now so much is being done in the open. So you can see, again, if you go to the link in the notes section, you can see all the people that work on the compiler and the language. And as you'd guess, most of these people do work at Microsoft, but there are people, if you would scroll down the list farther, that don't work at Microsoft, that do these contributions, and you can do this as well. In fact, if you look at the URL for this page, which has all these issues that are kind of curated, look for the label community. Those are ones that have been identified as they're probably not that, not that big of an effort for somebody to grab it and say, I'm going to give this a whirl and try to, fix it or add this feature or whatever the case may be and submit a PR. So take a look at that if you're interested in actually contributing to Rosslyn and C#. So now we have this open compiler. C# is built with C#. And so from version 6 on, as I just mentioned, the cadence starts getting faster. You start seeing a new release of the language pretty much every year now. Okay. And so with version 6, there were a lot of these smaller-ish but cool features like name of, string interpolation. I absolutely love. That's a really good way to handle combining strings together. Version 7 was a little bit of an experiment in that, yes, you had this version 7 release with these features, but then they also had point releases. So there was a 7.1 where they finally added an async May method, small thing, but very, very nice to have. 7.2 where we had interior pointers, yay, but span was actually added as something supported within the language itself. That was a really cool thing. And then 7.3. So this was this idea of, could they get smaller-ish features in to the language rather than waiting for a longer release cycle? They haven't done it since, but they gave this a whirl and got some feedback from the community in terms of how they felt about this. Version 8 is where we also start to see this bifurcation in terms of where C# could run. So if you're still building applications on top of a version of .NET Framework, this is the one where it starts to bifurcate, where it starts to, some things work and some things don't, and some things are kind of, you have to do a little bit of kind of like patching operations to see if you can get it to work on the .NET Framework. Default interface members will never work on any version of the .NET Framework because that required a CLR change. And in fact, if you go to the site that I grabbed this from, this is a big wall of text. The key thing to focus on here is what I have bolded, which says that using C# 8 is only supported on platforms that implement .NET Standard 2.1. So that means it's not going to work on .NET Framework. So now everything from that point on is really all the hotness, all the good stuff, all the changes are going to be happening on what was called .NET Core and is now .NET 5 and future versions of .NET. It's the one.NET of the future, okay? And that's what version 9, which I'm going to be talking about tonight, that's where all the features have landed in .NET 5. And so the plan and the cadence from this point on is there will be a new release of C# with every release of .NET. So coming up in November with .NET 6, there'll be a C# 10. With .NET 7 next year, there will be a C# 11, if that's the name they stick to, and then .NET 9, math is hard. .NET 9 will be C# 12, apparently. So that's kind of the plan and the cadence right now. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of features that we've added on C# 9 for .NET 5. So without further ado, let's get into those features. I'm going to do a whole bunch of demos here. All right.
Quick question here,
yeah.
Jason. So starting like C# 8 when we had the fork, are there features that folks who are on framework are really hurting to get, do you know? Or are those like nice to haves?
I guess it depends on what you would consider here to be a nice to have. Nullable reference types, that's now becoming more and more of a thing, in the core APIs that we all use that are from .NET itself. Default interface members, some people really don't like it. I don't know if it's actually if it's being used now within what you would arguably consider the BCL, those APIs, or not. So, maybe not. I like actually nullable reference types. Ranges is a small thing, but that makes code a little bit more succinct. But again, the point is, if you look at things that we're going to be talking about with version 9, that maybe these things again could possibly work against the framework. Depends, but it's just over time, it's just going to get to be where, the train is on .NET 5 and beyond. That's where you want to be.
Right.
So if any of these features are things I really, really wish I had, but you're on .NET Framework 4.8 or previous, it's just that train's just going to start getting farther and farther and farther away from you.
Okay. And then maybe one more random question before you get into this. Like, you're obviously a language nerd, like you live and breathe in this thing. But what if I'm a developer who just cares about shipping stuff? I'm not staying up to date with all of these features. My code still looks like it was written like 10 years back. Like, what's my inspiration to get up on and get going with some of these new things? Is it like how concise and how nice my code would be? Or are you just like literally going to be lacking features in the way you do things unless you jump ship?
It depends on what you're doing and what your code base is focused on. I would say that it does. I've noticed there's been a move to having your code being a little bit more succinct. You'll definitely see that with the first example that I'm going to show in .NET 9. And there's been other things like previously, I don't remember which version, but where you could have a using statement, but you don't need the curly braces to have a block if you don't need it. So, that just shrinks the code a little bit. And there's been things I've heard about in C# 10 that there, other things they're looking at to make your code smaller and more succinct and simple. At the end of the day, shipping code that users are happy with is good code. So I wouldn't say that somebody, they can't, you can write an app targeting C# 5 or C# 6. It's just, this is the cadence where things are going. The one thing I've noticed in tools like Visual Studio, and I'm imagining other tools, even like VS Code and Writer and whatnot, is if you type things in a older way, that you'll get these refactorings and things to pop up and say, hey, maybe you want to have your code changed to this.
Yeah.
And it starts gearing you and moving you towards doing things in a more recent version update way and without a lot of pain either. So
yeah, I like that. It's kind of like the push versus pull. Like, if you can steer me in the right path, maybe I don't always have to learn the latest and greatest thing. Just tell me while I'm writing it.
Yep, exactly. All right, so let me jump into the features for C# 9. And as soon as I bring up Visual Studio, you're going to see one. And the way I've always done this talk, like I've been doing a What's New in C# talk since version 6, then there's 7, then there's 8. And I always have this just console app that has a method that we dive into, and then that shows you how this new feature works. So with this one, same idea, except the console app is going to look a little weird. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me show you. So we'll go right here. And this is my program file. And you may look at this and go, just thought of talking heads. You may ask yourself, you may think when you see this that where's my program class? Where is my main method? What's going on? This is called top level statements. And in fact, if you look at my code, or if you're going to look at it later, you'll notice that all these methods have a link to this feature. And so you can take a little bit of a deeper dive and read more about what's in the docs from the Microsoft site. But this is what's called top level statements. So if you have a file that after your using statements, if you have them, just starts calling a method or starts doing like var c is equal to, Jason as a customer, and that's a string. If it sees that, what it's assuming is, oh, that's actually where I need to synthesize a program class. I need to synthesize a main method for you. And then all this stuff just basically gets magically put into the program and main method, where it needs to be. And then it just works. If you try to do this in more than one file, the compiler is going to bark at you because it doesn't know which one's actually the entry point, so to speak. But this is going to be the first thing that's called from your main method. So again, this is called top level statements. When I first saw this, I didn't understand why to do this because, again, I've been a C# developer for a long time and I'm so used to program and main, and it was never a big deal. But I was watching a video from Jared Parsons. He's one of the developers on the C# team. And he was talking about how he I think he was talking about how he does a class for a local high school or something like that. And he uses C#. And so the first Hello World app you see is you have a program class, you have using statements, and you have a main method, and you have a string array with args going in the parameter. And he said, if you look at other languages like Python, it's just like print hello world or whatever the command is. Whereas you see it in C#, there's all this ceremony, there's all this stuff that, okay, fine, at some point you have to learn this. But rather than just being able to say, run it and go, he was getting all these questions like, what's a class? Why do I have this program thing here? What's a using statement? What's a, on and on and on. Where now what you can actually do, if I just comment all these, whoops, I don't want to cut them out. I want to comment them out. I can actually now, if I want to, say system.console.writeLine and just say hello. Okay. And that works as a one-line C# program, which you couldn't do before. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but
no, it is cool. Yeah, it is cool. And I think like
with all my any app, whether it's an ASP.NET app or whatever, if it's just literally a console app, this is how I'm setting up that program class, because I don't have it anymore. This to me just seems a lot easier.
Yeah, I think Jason, over and over, you're showing our age, because you have talked about a few things we have done back in the days. And then we don't realize, like, we sometimes do get into a walled garden. Like, we are so used to this, while a college kid starting out, they don't care about all this ceremony. And the same story with like .NET or VS Code. It's like just lowering the barrier to entry and just getting going as quickly as you can.
Yep, exactly. And the next thing I'm going to show records is there's a little bit of that there too, in terms of not having to write so much code and let the compiler do it for you. And, again, I'm going to watch the time and make sure I get through these. So we're going to be kind of doing a breadth discovery of all these features. I'm not going to go too far in depth with these, but records is probably one of the features that's seen the most in terms of press or discussion of all the C#9 features. And so what a record is basically a very succinct, easy way to build a type that you let the compiler essentially do this all for you. I know some people look at records as a very simple way to build a POCO or something along those lines, or data access class or whatever you want to call it, which is true. But what records also provide are ways where you don't have to build things like equality or do along with equality, doing the hash codes or doing toStrings or any of these other things. By just using a keyword, you let C# build all this stuff for you. So what does that look like? So I'm going to go into demonstrate records here, and let me just run this, and then we'll kind of compare what we're seeing to what you'll see in the console window. Okay, so zoom that out a little bit, and once it finally kicks in, there we go, cool. Okay, so I'll leave this going. I'll come back here. So you see I have a new customer passing in an age and a name. I print out that customer, which we'll call toString. I also just print those out here myself just to compare the difference between the two. And you'll notice that when I print out the customer the first time, it actually has this format to it. This is what I'm doing in my write line of the console. Okay. Now, the reason why that all works is, well, you'd think toStrings is customizing customer, but it isn't. If I actually go to the definition of customer, that's what it looks like. Okay. So you'll notice first there's this record keyword. And what records are essentially classes right now. There's talk about maybe allowing this to be a struct in a future version of C#, but records are essentially just classes. Okay. And a record, when you define it this way, you're defining a constructor that takes an age and a name, and it's also defining properties for you that have an age and a name property. That's it. Think of all the stuff that you'd have to write before to do this. You'd have to write, a property for an int age, a property for straight name. You'd have to put the constructor separate from the definition of the class, on and on and on. If I wanted to have things like equality, which I'm doing down here, I'm saying, hey, look, here's another customer that's got the exact same values as this customer up here. And when I compare them using double equals, you'll notice that actually shows up to being true. But when you look at the code here, there is no I-equatable implementation. There is no equals overriding, nothing like that. It's just all synthesized and done for you. And you'll notice that I have in the comments here, I say use a tool like ILSpy to actually see the generated code and what's done underneath the scenes. I'm not going to do that today, but use a tool like a decompiler and you'll see all these things implemented for you. Okay. So it's nice that way. In fact, I put on Twitter, I don't know, a month or two ago and just jokingly argued and said, everybody should just define all their stuff as records now, which yes and no, sometimes you may not want all that stuff generated for you, but it gives you that value type of quality that for the most part, that's what I want in my class definitions. It provides you with a way of immutability. You'll notice that up here, I didn't have this code uncommented. It's because if I do this, it should bark at me and it's going to say it's an init only property. Okay. And then if you squint hard enough, hopefully this will actually zoom in and work correctly. And I didn't break anything. You'll notice that it gives you kind of this object initializer and init only property. And you're kind of like, what actually is this? Well, let me comment that back out so we don't have an error. And what's going on with records is by default, they are immutable in that you can't set the property values after construction, which is okay. But a lot of people also like the object initialization syntax where you're able to create an object where, especially with lists and dictionaries and whatnot, and you use the curly braces and you put in the new values and it all just works. Okay. So that won't work with the age property here, but what I can do is create a whole new customer with this wither. And what this with keyword is doing here is saying, we'll take the values from this customer and assign them to this new customer object, except change the name to Joe. And the reason this works is because when you do it this way, the properties are generated where they're going to have this get and init as the accessors to the property. Okay. So init is a new keyword and it's not limited to records. You can use them wherever you want. And what an init property means is that it can only be assigned in a constructor or an object initializer, okay, or a with statement, because this is technically, if you squint hard, is kind of like an object initializer. Yeah.
Hey, Jason, if you can just pause for just 1 second. G. Shonia is a regular at our user group, is asking if it's just equal output or is it just a single instance in the memory?
Well, I'm assuming what he's asking is second customer and customer, are those two distinct objects in memory or are they the same reference? If that's what he's asking.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And the answer is they're two distinct objects. Okay. Because of the way records will implement equality. Again, if you use a tool like ILSpy, you'll see that it implements I-equatable. It overrides equals. It does, and then it just looks at all your properties and says, essentially, are they all equal as well? So those are two distinct objects. And this one is as well. This customer with a different name is a different object in memory than what customer is as well. Okay, so he says yes. Okay, cool. Yeah. I answered the question.
And then maybe one more here. Okay, so we're all just a little bit of older people here hanging out. WCF. WCF maybe is a little old school, but like EF core is very much happening here. So do you know what he's asking here?
So is this friendly? Yeah, is this friendly with tech that relies on default constructors? So yeah, I mean, you can create, for example, a record that's defined this way. And then, by the way, you can inherit from it. You can't inherit a class from a record. That doesn't work, but you can inherit records from other records. But you don't have to define record this way. You can say like public record something. I don't know what you would call it. And then I can also, if I want to, I can have like public string name get. And then I'll use init. You can use set if you want. You don't have to make them immutable. You can use set. And of course, now it's barking at me for some other reasons, but we don't care about that right now. I can also make something and say public something and pass in the string name and so on. So And I could also then put my own implementation, my equatable up there if I want. So it's it does all these things by default, but then you can replace them and put whatever you want in that definition to your heart. You can do whatever you want from that point on. So now when you talk about WCF, yeah, I haven't done WCF in a long time. So yeah, I wouldn't know about that one. Sorry. So, all right. So that's a very quick overview of records. And, again, that's probably the one that's seen most press from a lot of people that talk about C# 9 and new features. So I'm saving the best for last because I like source generators. Okay. So next one, and some of these I'm not actually going to run. I'll just show you the code so you can see how they work. Target type new. Some people freak out when they see var. They just don't like var. They want to see everything typed out. They like to hurt their hands. They want to make people type everything out, which is kind of funny because the tooling will help you as soon as you start. Like if I say CU, it's already getting down to what I'm actually looking for in IntelliSense. Okay, fair enough. By the way, here's a really evil trick to play on somebody. Do this. Okay. Now, the reason why this is so bad is you see everything lighting up with red is because var was not a keyword until C# 3. And so it's perfectly legitimate that somewhere there is a type called var in your code. And it now makes, well, this doesn't work because it's supposed to be a var returning and it's a customer returning. Yeah, so this is evil. Don't do this. If you really don't like var, use editor configs and set it so that you're enforcing you want to actually put the type names in there. But it's fun when you can do tricks like that. All right. Anyway, so this feature is basically saying if C# knows what the target type is, then you don't have to specify the name of the type when you're calling the constructor. So as you can see here, I just say new, and then I pass in the age and the name because it knows it's a customer because I've defined that on the left-hand side. Now, if I say var here, obviously the compiler can't figure it out and it has no idea what you're trying to call. So, if you like var, like I do, then in this case, target type new doesn't really help. Where it can help is in some cases, like I come up to this wrap dictionary, declaring fields. Now, when you declare a field, you have to specify the type name. And this is something that's been argued many times. Why does C# do this if I could put on the right side the name of the type when I'm saying constructor or whatever? But sometimes you don't do this. You would just do that. And so then what? How you declare it? You have to declare it. So long story short is you have to do this. Now a target type new, if I want to initialize it, I can just say new, and that will make a new dictionary of int and string, and that just works. If you have a method that takes a parameter of a type like customer, well, then you can just pass in new, the age and the name in our case, and that just works because the compiler is going to infer that you're trying to create a new customer type. Now, this also starts getting into some readability questions. Like if I ran into this a couple days ago where I had something like var service is equal to new, and this was legitimate. I mean, obviously it's going to give me red here because it doesn't know what I'm trying to do. But in fact, I think it was calling some like factory, create or something like that. I can't remember what it was. But then the thing I was passing in also was taking something. And so I could write something that looks like this. And so the point is, if you have too many of these news in here, how readable does that make your code? And I'm kind of a little on the fence with that one. I don't know how far you go with that because it can make things not easy to understand when you look at it later and going, what exactly is this doing? Okay. So that's target type new. Module initializer. This basically gives you the ability to say, I want code within a method to run before anything else runs in my application, even before program main runs. And again, if you're doing top level statements, there's still a program main that's still going to run. Okay. So in this case, what's going to happen is if I look at first of all, I'm going to print this out first. And then I'm going to print out whatever the sum is to some values that's in this immutable array. Of course, if it's not initialized, I'm going to have problems. And in fact, if I come back up here and I change this to that, and then I say, go ahead and run this, which is going to bark because that's still running. But now it should succeed, and we should see an exception because that property value hasn't been set. And so when I call sum on it, this is what happens. Okay. So what I can do in this case, if I go back here, I can put this module initializer on this method. And this has some restrictions. It can't be async. It can't take any values. It has to be void returning. Can't return anything. Okay. But if you mark a method this way, what this will do is say, call this even before program main is called. And in fact, you see here that I also have a write line to say I'm calling this method. And now if I run the code, what you'll see is 3 prints where this is called before this is called within that essentially main method. Okay.
So what is, Jason, what's the use case for this?
This is something that actually was allowed. There's a lot of things that are allowed in the CLR level that aren't surfaced, or you can't do them in C#. For example, you can overload methods by return type only in IL. You can't do that in C#. Okay. And so this is something that apparently was allowable if you did some IL trickery and marked a method as such. And I know somebody asked, is a static only? And yes, and one per program. Yes. If you start having more than one, it doesn't know which one to run first. And then you start getting into the whole problem of how do I order them? What's dependent on what? And yuck, bad. We don't want to do that. So you can only have one of these. So this is also something that you probably do not want to declare in your class libraries, because what happens if the host app also declares one of these, or you have multiple of these across all these different class libraries that you're bringing into your application. So you can only have one of them. Okay. So why you want one of these is, I've never had a need for this, but apparently this is just a nice thing to have, where you just want to say, I know I want this before anything else in the program has started up. I know that this has been set, and that's kind of why you want it. So this is one of those features where I've thought, am I going to need this? Maybe, maybe not. But one of the things with C# that I've picked up on over the years is even if there's a feature that I may not find useful, they don't put these features in because reasons. They don't put them in just willy-nilly. There's a lot of discussion and justification in terms of why a feature should be added, because it's not going to be removed. They're very adamant about backwards compatibility. So again, if it's something that I don't necessarily find useful myself, maybe somebody would find this useful. There's going to be another feature I'm going to talk about in just a moment. In fact, I think it's the next one. Yes, locals and init flag, where I look at this one and I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to need this, but this may be something that, again, depending upon what you're doing in your code, you may find it useful. Like if you're doing stack alloc, if you're doing unmanaged code, if you're handling memory directly, you might want to put this in. And what is this actually doing? So let me put this one running. Okay. And then if I run this right now, what you'll see is hopefully a GUID that just had, I still got the module initializer running. So let me turn that off before I forget. Not that it's going to hurt anything. It's only seeing that printed in the console window. Okay. You see that we have a GUID that's just a bunch of zeros. Okay. And I know this looks a little weird why I have a pointer and an address. Of the point of why I'm doing this is because in C#, your local variables are zero initialized, which means they're basically zeroed out. So it doesn't just take any random data that might already be in that memory allocate in that space in memory. It's going to make sure all that's defaulted to what's typically going to be zeros. That's why you saw a whole bunch of zeros there for the GUID. But if you know that you're never going to use that until you set it to a real value of a GUID, what you can do is now use this skip locals init attribute. Okay. And now when I run this, okay, there we go. You see now it's a little bit more of garbage, because there was some stuff that GUID struct is pointing at initially, that because I put this in here, it's not being cleared out. So I have to set it to something so it's actually a valid GUID. By the way, you don't want to create grids this way where you're relying upon what random data is in memory. Okay. Now, why you want to do this? Again, if you've done things where you're handling memory yourself, if you're doing stack allocs, if you're doing things where you're doing this kind of outside the bounds of what the garbage compiler, what the CLR knows you're doing. Don't just put this in your code and say, hey, maybe I'll get a tiny little bit of performance increase, or benefit in my application. There's an article that I've got listed in the notes section on the last slide where somebody already went through and said, why would you want to use this? And it's only in those cases where you are doing memory management yourself. If you're not, don't put it in. It's just not going to do anything. But he shows through benchmark.net performance runs that in these cases where you are, there is noticeable, but I mean, at least you can see it in the benchmark runs and the results that yes, it does actually help in those cases. So if that is for what you need, then you may want to consider putting that in your code. Yeah.
I think
and I just answered that question.
I think that's Conrad Yoder. And mdebug was asking if it's the same in debug mode. I don't know. What does that mean? Like, does it run differently, or the allocations happen differently?
I have this, I believe, if I go look at configuration manager, it is in release mode. I think if I put it in debug mode, it wouldn't matter. I mean, I don't think that changes anything. You know what I mean? So if that's what the question is getting at, then yeah. All right, got to move on here. The number types, I'm not going to run. Just want to let people know that now C# has native types, a native integer, and then there's that's 32 bits, and well, native to the size of the processor on your machine. So there's an n int and then an n long, I believe. Well, I just said n int. I think it's n long. And of course, I'm wrong. Maybe it's uint. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. But the point is that there are these native types now. And for me, I can't think of a use of why I'd have these, but maybe you're running on different processor architectures and you do want to use native integers. And for those people that wanted this feature, you had to kind of use int pointers, the int ptr type before, but it didn't have all the goodness of actually being a number type. And now they are. So in fact, if you look at what value is represented, even though it's showing n int, it's actually going to run, if you look in ILSpy, I believe it's actually typed as an int pointer, but it has extra goodness on top of it. The other one I find a little bit more interesting is that there's now a half type. This is half of a single, I believe. So it's like an even smaller floating point number than a single. Now, there's no way to declare a half in C#9 or any version just yet. Maybe in the future there will be, like if I can say single or double, or I put like a letter after the number to say, hey, it's an L, L, or shows you how often I do these. M is a decimal, I believe. There's nothing like that yet. You have to cast it to say I want it to be a half type. But if you want floating point support, but you're not going to need a number as big as what a single can do, you can use this half type. And so it's smaller. You have to worry a little bit more about precision, but it can potentially have a little bit less memory and give you a little bit more performance in those specific cases where you need it. Okay. Covariant return types. Again, I'm going to be rushing through these, but we want to make sure I hit the time. So the covariant return type, this really shows up, especially when you're trying to do something like a Fluent API where I have a base class like a pipeline, and I have an add method, which is going to return a pipeline. I'm just setting the ID value to this for whatever reason. But notice it's virtual. If I create a subclass of pipeline like I do down here, before in .NET, if I'd override it, I couldn't change the return type. It had to still be pipeline. And then you get kind of these casting weird issues where I know what's really being returned is a type that inherits from that base type, but I can't express that in C#. Now you can. So notice here I can override that method, and I can say that I return a custom pipeline because it derives from pipeline. Okay, that's where that covariance and contravariance comes into play. You can return something covariantly if it derives from the thing that you originally said, like in this case, pipeline. Okay. So covariant return types are now supported in C#9. A couple things about methods, in this case, static anonymous methods. So if you've ever passed in a lambda to a link method like any, you'll notice that I do have the ability to capture or close over the local value here. Now, maybe that's a good thing, and maybe that's not what you want, because sometimes when you do this, it can lead to some things that, just some behavior that maybe you weren't expecting. Okay. But there's nothing to stop you from doing this. If you really want now, notice that you can put a static keyword in front of that anonymous method. And that's why I have this commented out, because if I take this off here, let this code actually be live, you'll notice that C# is now putting the squiggles here and saying a static anonymous function cannot contain a reference to value. In other words, you can't close over local variables. So that way you can kind of keep your function nice and tidy and only looking at the things that it's been given. Okay, so you do that with static anonymous methods. Local functions that were added in the C#7, I think in C#8 you were able to add them as static local functions, and so now they're just doing it for anonymous methods. You can also add attributes to local functions if you want to do that. So that wasn't supported before in C#9. You can now add attributes to local functions if you want to. The discards and lambdas, discards have been a thing now for I think 2 or 3 versions, and you can now use them as discards within your lambda, which is basically saying, I don't care what the value is. I'm just telling the compiler, just literally ignore it by using that underscore. Function pointers. This is one of those edge cases where, it's something where you're really, really, really trying to eke out as much performance as you possibly can. You'll notice that this invoke method is taking a target, which is just a method itself, but then doing an address of target. And if I look at invoke here, you notice that the first thing is something that we've probably all seen before, an action. We all use action and funcs. Those are quite common in C#. But the second argument looks really, really bizarre. It's a delegate pointer, takes an int and returns a void. Okay. But in both cases, it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to invoke this target method here, which just prints out the value. So I'm going to get 42 both times. This function pointer syntax basically allows you to invoke a function or pass it into a pinvoke, which is another case for this, without the overhead of delegates, essentially. Okay, so if those cases are what you're running into, you may want to use this, but notice that you need to be in an unsafe block at some point if you want to use a function pointer. So there's that trade-off too of arguably safety to consider. Okay.
These are really esoteric things here.
They are. I'll get back to something that's a little bit more applicable, but I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. These features are things that, you say they're esoteric. I agree. I don't think I'm going to use a function pointer in my whole life. I haven't used the unsafe keyword in a long time, or a pinvoke. But those are still necessary for people that are writing like lower level libraries. And so when they're trying to find any place that they can to eke out in some performance, that's where you turn to things like this. Okay.
Again, this may be contentious here. Delegates, I think it's a mixed bag, right? What are your feelings about delegates, Jason?
A func is a delegate, an action is a delegate, predicate is a delegate. They're all delegates. So, they haven't gone away. Passing in a reference to a function at some point was always been a delegate. Action and func has just been there to handle the vast majority of cases that we all run into, and it's a little bit easier to code around and manage. So, writing a delegate directly, that's something I haven't done in a long time either. But that's kind of what everything is based on, though. The sugar is nice. So, better conditional expressions. This is something where if you've ever used a ternary operator, which sometimes I use and abuse a lot, where I'll sometimes embed them within each other and then I get yelled at because it's not code that you can read, but I like the ternary operator. The problem is that if you've had types for the true case or the false case that they're not the exact same type, the ternary just didn't work. You had to cast one so that they both had like the same base type being returned back, and it was kind of ugly. Now what you can do is you have to declare the base type on the left. You don't get around that. But if you say they both inherit from customer, then I can just pass one or the other back depending on what condition hits with the ternary. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna make an executive decision here, and I'm just gonna skip over these three because I do want to watch the time here. So there's things that have been added with partial methods. There's been some more additions with pattern matching, which I'll quickly say. If you're going to check for null, please use is or is not. Is not has now been added in C#9. That's the way you should do it from now on, because you're not actually doing the double equals operator call. This is literally comparing to null. So that's a good thing.
Hey, Jason, so I feel like we've been slowing you down a little bit. So if you need to take a little bit more time, like we're all here to learn. Like we got until like 7:30 Eastern time to kind of hang out. So if you want to take a little bit more time, then we hang out a little less on Teams. That's really cool.
Okay. What is that not equal sign? This thing. So that's called a ligature, I think is the name for it. This is a font that's called Cascadia Code. And it's been around for a couple of years now. And when I first saw it, I ran away screaming in horror because I didn't really like it. But the more I've used it, I don't know if I've just beat myself over the head with it or what, but I kind of like it. There's other cases where that will show up. So that's literally just saying, let me try to do this. If I say not equal, boom, it just changes it. So that's what that is saying it's not equal to. And that's because of that font itself and how it works. So, all right. I hear you about the time, but I'm actually trying to get to the last feature because it's the best for last. It's, to me, I think one of the coolest features that's, gotta be the top three. I said generics. Source generators to me is one of the coolest features. I think I actually said to you, Sam, that I could do a whole talk on source generators, and I've done that because there's so much about this feature that I find it enables a whole ton of things. So I'm not going to be able to go through all of it, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it because I think it's important. So what is a source generator? A source generator is essentially the name of the feature is saying. It allows you to generate source code. Okay. But it's doing this in a way that, because I'm always going to get a question on T4, it's built into the compiler itself. Okay. So it's part of the compilation process. So it's not something that's a separate tool or something that you have to kind of integrate into your flow. Source generators will just essentially happen. And they can happen and do things based on whatever you want to see in your code. I'm going to show an example with object mapping in a moment, but I've done source generators for mocking library that I have. I just wrote a source generator to augment a NuGet package called WebAssembly. Somebody wrote something in .NET where you can read and write a WASM file in .NET. If you think of MonoCecil, that's kind of the same thing, except it's doing a WASM file. But WebAssembly is a subset of IL, so he also allows you to take a WASM file and compile it directly natively into IL, and then you can call exported functions from that. But you have to generate a class to say what functions you want to call, and so I just wrote a generator to generate that class for you. So there's a whole bunch of features that you can do with source generators. Now, before I show you the example, one other question that comes up all the time is, can I change code with source generators? No, you cannot. And from all the reactions and everything I've seen from the people on the Microsoft team that get asked the same question about source generators, that's probably, I don't want to say never, because I never thought we'd see a 64-bit version of Visual Studio, but here we are at Visual Studio 2022, where they announced that that's going to be 64-bit. So maybe in the future, there'll be some, way to edit code, modify code, do more metaprogramming type of things. But for now, it's just, you can generate new code. Okay. But that sounds like a limitation, but I've not found it to be limiting at all. There's, and there's a lot of things that people have done in the community. around source generators to do all sorts of amazingly cool things. So let me just show you this example real quick. This is something I called inline mapping. And I always have to say this is not meant to be a competitor to, what's the, I'm blanking on the name, but it's the one that everybody uses, AutoMapper. Okay, we'll get back to that result in a moment. It's not a competitor to it. I don't want to go down the road of trying to do all what that does. But what I want to show with this is just saying, well, if I take kind of a simplistic approach of object mapping, I want to take a source object and I want to find all the properties on it that match what's on a destination. And so I'll just copy all those values to the destination. If the accessibility is right, if the visibility is something I can see, then I'll do that. Okay. Now you could write that code. I could write that code. You know, that type of mapping code is not that hard to do, but it's tedious. It's boring. It's somewhat prone to error. If you think of iNotify property change, same thing. It's fairly straightforward to implement, but it's just tedium. Who wants to do that? Okay. In fact, that was one of the cases that from the C# team that said, if we can't do iNotify property change as a source generator, then that feature is not done yet. We have to be able to do, like, have people have a way to do that automatic generation. Okay. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm saying I've got a source here, which has an ID and a name and a when as a date time, and I have a destination, the same values, except I have an attribute on my class here. It says I'm mapping to type of destination. And I have a couple of other attributes in this library. I have a map from, and I also have map, where you can just say map the source type and the destination type. Okay. For this example, it's just saying the source can map to the destination. What my generator does, if I actually go into the generator, and of course I'm going to be skipping over a lot of details here, but if you look at the generator, you'll notice that it implements iSource generator, and it also has a generator attribute on there. This is essentially for the compiler to know, oh, you want to do source generation. Okay. So when execute is called, what I do is in this initialize, I'm actually saying I want to register for syntax notifications. And this is a detail I'm going to skip over for now. This map receiver, essentially what this does is it gives you a way to find all the things that you're actually looking for in your code. In my case, what I'm trying to do here, for example, is I'm trying to find where classes or structs have this attribute declared on them. So it gives you a syntax tree. You can find a semantic model from it. You can kind of walk through that tree and say, hey, if this is a class declaration, does it have this attribute on it? And if it does, then that's something I want to generate source code for. So when execute gets called, what I'm going to do is basically go through all of these mappings and generate all the cases where I have a source type, and I'm using the names, but wherever I have type A being mapped to type B. Okay. And what comes out of however you do this, there's so many ways that you can do this. Essentially, what you need to have happen at the end of the day is generate some C# code. It can be just strings mashed together. There's a NuGet package called Scribian, which is kind of a templating language that you can do in C#. You could use that. You could build syntax trees with the project, Rosslyn compiler API if you wanted to. There's a bunch of different ways where you can, at the end of the day, get a C# string. Okay, so if I go into my builder here, I'm just going to show you, if you start squinting hard enough, you'll see, oh, I'm going to have a using system in my code. Oh, I'm going to have a using, what the destination namespace may be. So I've got that in scope as well. I'm going to start generating a static partial class with the right name in there and creating a static method mapped to whatever the destination name is. And then in here, I'm going to have a way to map all the source and destination properties together. And that's what gets put out as a source generator. So the long story short is, you see here I have this map to destination method, which is not something you see declared on source, nor is it an extension method I made. But if I have 12 into it, that's what the source generator did. Okay. And in fact, if I pull this and dock it here for just a second, and I come back here and I say, let's put in public string that and say something. I don't care what it is. Okay, the name doesn't matter. You'll notice that nothing changes in the source generator. But if I go to my destination object and put that in there, Visual Studio just tells me to rerun my source generator, and now I've got that in there. Okay. And so that will map a source to a destination. And in fact, if I do this and I come back here and I do that, and I think I'm in debug mode on this one, and I am. So if I put F5 here.
That's kind of what G. Shoney was asking. What's the debugging story like?
Yeah, I just watched a video from some of the people on the Microsoft team talking about source generators, and there is some klutziness, for lack of a better term, on how you build and debug and test source generators. It works, but I don't have, I would need a whole session just to go through some of the things you need to watch out for. It works. I mean, if I do an F11 here, you see I step right into the code. This code is literally compiled into your assembly. And so it's debuggable. This is why this is so much more appealing than trying to do like IL modification or weaving at that level, because it's a lot harder to reason about and debug. This is much simpler. You can see if I can hover over self, I can see it's a source, I can see the property values. Everything just works because it's literally just C# code. So that's nice. And there's things that are coming as improvements to source generators to make debugging and other things just easier with source generators. But yeah, you can debug it. You can F12 on it and just see it yourself if you want to. If you want to save source generated code, by default, it doesn't. It's kind of a little trick where you're not actually saving that to disk. There's a flag you can set in your CSproj file, and I forget the name of it offhand. But if you really want to save all your source generated code, you can do that. It's just by default, it doesn't do that. Yeah. Is debugger capable step through your generated code? Yep. Just C# code. They basically take your generated code and embed it into a PDB. I don't know the details on this. This was, again, just something I found out a couple of days ago. But they explained that they basically put it into like your PDB, and so you just debug right into that generated code, and it just works. So really nice that way.
Do you have you seen, Jason, like examples where they do stuff with like iNotify property change? Because like I deal a lot with like XAML C# code bases, and that's what we do like day in and day out.
Yep.
So anything we can do to help?
Yeah. So if you look at there's like a source generator cookbook, and there's source generator examples that come directly from Microsoft. And like I said, that's the one that they had to have an example around. So if you look at their example, what they essentially do is and I'll just kind of like type this up by magic hand waving, but you'll get the idea. So if I have like a public class customer, and if I want to have a private string name, what I think they do is auto notify. So that's their attribute name. And once you do that, and you also have to make this partial, because what it's going to do is generate another partial customer class, because then the compiler just mashes them all up together at compile time. And that auto notify tells it, you have a field here. So I'm going to wrap a property around it. And I'm also going to have customer implement iNotify property change. And I'm going to do all the right things that when that property changes to this field, then I'm going to do the notification as that interface dictates. Could they have done this another way? Possibly. They could have maybe just had it where you say auto notify, and I have a type of string, I have a name of, not name of it, actually have to have the name of the property or something like that. Okay. And there. And so that's like actually on the class or something like that. So there's many ways that you could have actually implemented it. That was just one way that they did it. But yeah, there's definitely examples out there that show how you can do iNotify property change basically automatically, and you end up just doing it with 1 or 2 lines of code. You don't have to implement any of that. There was also another example that I found really interesting, where I think his name is Andrew Locke, where he used a source generator to say, well, if you have a Blazor application and you have routing built in, I'm completely blanking on the name of the directive right now, but where you're basically saying, I can accept a route with this pattern. And so if that's what gets called in my application, it's just going to route to my component and off I go. Well, that all gets compiled down to a route attribute in your assembly. And so what he said is, well, why don't I use a source generator so I can find all of the classes that have a route attribute, inspect the route attribute, and basically build, I think it's like a list or some list type object that tells you what all the routes are. And so it was almost like a way where you could build like a swaggerized version of your Blazor app to have like all these routes and show which ones are actually available, but it's all done at compile time. It's not something he originally did it with reflection at runtime, but then he changed it to a source generator. And, you know, it was like, that was a really cool idea. And one of the reasons why you might want to do something as a source generator, especially if you're doing a lot of reflection, is for performance. This isn't a guarantee, but this performance test project that I have here, I said, well, why don't I just try to compare what you do with mapping with kind of like a reflection approach where you just do this over and over again, use my inline approach and the extension method that's generated, and then use AutoMapper. And I want to be very clear, I am not digging on AutoMapper. It's got like 100 million downloads. There's a reason why people like this. It's widely used. And it is optimized. If you look at the source code, there's a lot of things that are done underneath the scenes to make this as fast as possible. The code that I'm generating is literally exactly what you need to do, and it's resolved at compile time. You really can't make it any faster. If you could, you would just generate that code, and that's what would end up in your assembly. So if you look at the results here, and let me make it a little bit smaller, you'll notice that the inline way is the fastest and it allocates the least amount of memory. Okay. So again, this isn't a guarantee that you create a source generator to remove reflection, it's going to be faster, but it does make things arguably a little bit quicker. And it's definitely one of the cases that you want to consider for source generators. Yeah. And yes, you got the notify property change. I don't think that's the one from Microsoft, but that's
no. It's just something I was just looking around, and this is, I think, like new enough where we're just trying to all understand like where some of these things might work. Like Conrad was asking if we could do stuff with MVVM design patterns, and yeah, I mean, I haven't seen anything, but yeah, probably.
Yeah, if you go into my presentations repo, you'll find my PowerPoint for my source generators talk. Again, go in the notes on the last page, and I have links to a whole bunch of things there. There's, I think, one site called Awesome Source Generators or something, where somebody's like keeping track of all the source generator projects that people have come up with. So you can take a look at those. I mean, I don't think we've even touched the surface on what this can do, because, it's a new feature. And the Microsoft team has said that they're surprised that function pointers are actually more popular than they thought they were going to be, which was shocking to me, but also source generators. Like they said, they knew people would want to use source generators. They just did not expect it to be as widely used as it is out of the gate with C# 9. So they're pleasantly surprised with that. So, all right.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So let me just go to my slides here, and we'll kind of start moving toward a future look, so to speak. Demo, again, those are all the features. I could probably spend 2 or 3 hours going through all this stuff if I wanted to. There's so many details on all these things that I didn't touch upon. But as you can see, there's lots of stuff to consider for version 9. But what about where we're going to be going into the future? This is one of the nice things about it being an open source world now at Microsoft, is that your path is pretty clear. Yeah, at some point where you go down the road, it's going to bend, and probably nobody really knows other than Mads Torgensen, who's the lead designer of C# these days. And even he probably, being way out in the trees there, maybe kind of just coming up with stuff that will never be seen by the public. Who knows? I have no idea. But that path is much clearer. If you think about before, you'd have to go to a PDC or some other event where Microsoft would kind of finally show you a little bit about what's coming in the new version of C#, which nobody knew about in the community. That really sucked. It really made that community kind of a one-way street, where now you can be as deep a part of this community as you want to be. And all the information about new ideas is all public and out in the open. So that's great. This is what's called version next. And we know that there's going to be a C# 10, probably. I highly doubt they're going to change that versionings, how they come up with a new name. But they technically just call it version next because they don't want to be pigeonholed too hard until they actually do say, yes, it's going to be C#10. In any event, these are things that are being targeted. Now, this is not a guarantee. Nobody said that this is all these are set in stone, but these are things that are being looked at, investigated, looking for being done in the next version of C#. Again, you can look at the site to find all the details on some of these. You can see down in the lower right, there's source generator version 2 APIs. There definitely needs to be some more love with source generators and making them easier to author, easier to debug, and as an author of a source generator, it can be kind of convoluted right now. One other thing that you can't do with source generators is you can't create other source other than C#. And the community has said, well, I'd like to be able to create a CSV file, or I'd like to be able to create a JSON file when I'm creating source. And so that's one of the things that's being looked at for the next version, is to say, I want to author other output types other than just C# code. Okay, so no guarantees, but some of these things are being looked at for the next version. There's also, if you look at their sites, they have like ways that you can see where they're looking at even farther down the road, and things that they're considering and discussing and arguing about. You can go to this working set site and take a look at the link in the notes, but where they talk about things like type classes. I really hope someday they put type classes in. This is where, if you've used TypeScript where you have structural typing rather than nominal typing, which we have in C# right now, that's nice, but I'd like to be in a world where I can actually do things like structural typing. And, whether that is something that ends up directly in C# or not, who knows? But I think if something like this was added, that would greatly enhance the type system in C#. So there are things that are being thought of all the time and discussed in terms of what comes into future versions. You can make a feature request if you want. So you notice that the label here is feature requests on this site. So these are things that people in the community have requested. And, you may have a really good idea, but let me strongly caution you on just saying, my idea is awesome, so I'm just going to write it up, and I'm going to, fork the compiler and then make all my changes on my branch and submit a PR and say, all right, go add that because I know everybody's going to want this. That will be rejected outright. There is a whole process to actually not just, putting in a feature request is one thing, but actually doing the work is a whole nother ballgame. So they have a site that talks about, if you actually really want to develop a language feature, it can be done by the community, but you have to follow their process. So do that. And if you want to, you can actually at some point, maybe possibly in the future, say, I actually added this feature to C#, or I was part of the team that did that. You can light that fire yourself in any way you want, whether that's adding a whole new feature or maybe just fixing a little bit of a bug in the Rosslyn API. It's a great world to be in, the language. And that's why, 7, 8-ish years ago when Windows 8 came out, I was kind of wondering about .NET. I was kind of wondering about C#, where we're going to be going. It felt like, the whole room was just black. There was no light in the room, and it was starting to feel kind of dark. And now the light is there again. The flame's lit, and it makes me feel more excited about where C# is headed in the future. Mm-hmm. So yeah. That's it for me in terms of what I got in my presentation. But if there's any other questions or comments or anything,
I don't know if this is a long discussion. And folks, if you are a part of the user group, the Meetup site, you know what I'm talking about. I sent you a link, so we're going to hop off to Teams where we can maybe have just a little bit more of an open conversation. But Jason, is this something you want to talk about?
Yeah. So let me just read real quick. I missed point about performances. Map using reflection line for source gen, unlike reflection, that this is not reflection, right? Produce IL equivalent. So that's a lot there. Let me just kind of interpret it as this is definitely not reflection emit. When you are, in fact, let me bring that up right now. If I go back to my source generator here and actually go into the map generator, if I go to map information, you'll notice you start seeing things like syntax node, I named type symbol. These are all things in the compiler API. So you're definitely, well, I'm not going to say you're not going to be using reflection in your source generator, but what I found is I'm mostly using things that are from the compiler API, like the syntax tree and all the components of a syntax tree, or a semantic model. That's where you start seeing things like symbols. So yeah, the API of what you're going to be using in a source generator is going to be different. And yeah, it's not reflection emit. You're not emitting IL. You're just emitting C# code that gets compiled by the C# compiler, just like any other code you're writing. And so it's going to be as fast as anything that you would normally write in C#. No difference. So hopefully that answered the question.
All right, and Jason, are you using C#9 right now?
Yes.
At work? Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
I am. So
Cool.
I always like you kind of hinted at the beginning. I'm not an expert on compiler theory or language design. I just kind of geek out about it. I find it very, very interesting. And so I just dive into the new versions of languages and just see what's available and what's there. So yeah, I'm definitely using it.
Absolutely. All right, well, Jason, it was a great conversation, which is why we are running over, but this was fun. If you don't have anything else to share, I'm going to take your desktop down, and I'm just going to thank you for kind of hanging out and showing us all this stuff. This was very educational for me, at least, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And Conrad, Jishania, M. everyone else in the chat room, thank you for hanging out with us. We are going to call it a day here, live on the internet, so we can hop over. This is completely optional, but there's a little Teams call where we can just kind of hang out a little bit more informally. So hopefully I'll see a few of you there. But until the next stream, stay safe, stay productive, and yeah, take care. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.